Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dungeon Dive. Daniel here. Alright, and welcome back to my Ranking of Kings series. And here we are. We're at the big one now, as far as I'm concerned. The Dark Tower, Book 1, The Gunslinger. The man in black fled across the desert, and the gunslinger followed. I wonder how many reviews of this book, of this series, have started with this line. Probably most of them. And it makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, it's one of the best opening lines ever written, I think. And I think a lot of people agree. A lot of people really like that line. And it just perfectly sets the stage for the journey that begins here. A journey not just in the fiction, but also a journey in the life of the author and a journey in the life of that author's constant readers. And that is something to be thinking about as the series progresses. King was a very young writer when he first typed those lines on that inherited, oddly shaped and colored paper. And he was a much older and different man when the series finished. But this is where it began. So The Dark Tower is an epic quest, weird western, horror, sci-fi fantasy story all about Roland's journey to find that mystical thing, that mystical tower. In this book, the first book of the series, The Gunslinger, we meet Roland, our hero, our gunslinging hero, the last of his kind, the last of these questing knights of this certain order. We learn of his dealings with the people in an ill-fated town called Tull. We learn of his coming of age when he sacrifices his pet hawk at the altar of passage. We learn of his meeting with a boy named Jake, a boy that Roland would let fall in the name of his quest. And we learn of the man in black, this mystical guy who might be working for some kind of force or other being, controlling the lives and women like puppets, some puppet master outside of the realm of possibility. Now, it really is almost unfair for me in this ranking series to include the Dark Tower books with the others. Spoiler alert, if you're going to be seeing a lot of the Dark Tower books at the very, very top of this list. Another spoiler alert, one of the Dark Tower books is my favorite Stephen King book of all time. I am what Stephen King and what a character in the series would call a tower junkie. King has said that the Dark Tower books are his least read books by his constant readers, but those who have read them all tend to love them more than anything, and that is totally me. Now, one of the reasons why I think The Gunslinger and The Dark Tower itself is not as well read as his other books is the first book, The Gunslinger, it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb from a lot of what King had written up to, or had published up to that point, and it still really does. It is written in a voice of an author still finding his way, still working out his kinks and finding his true voice. But it also contains this kind of raw power. And in that essence, I think it kind of reads like a Bachman book more than a King book. And I was talking with somebody last night. We had our first meeting of the Dark Tower Book Club, and somebody mentioned that it could have been published under Richard Bachman, and it might have made more sense. However, that's something we're going to have to revisit, because I just thought of something, and it would be a major spoiler for this series, and I don't want to give too much away right now. So I'm going to put a pin in that comment and a note, and we're going to come back to something that I just thought of many months down the line. So, all right, but this is especially true in its original trade publication. So, but then King would go on to revise the book at a later date when he was almost done with the series, and I think it's better for it. I don't think that King pulled a George Lucas Star Wars thing in his revisions. He didn't ruin the original. There were some like 35 years in between books 1 and 7. And so book 1 just read very differently, and it was missing some of the language. It was missing some of the lore that would be developed along the way. And so King went back and just kind of added those things. He changed something on almost every page from what I've read, added a lot of elements that would just connect the book better to the end. And I don't think any of those changes made the book worse. Most of them, in my opinion, made the book better. But even still, in its revised form, it's still a different kind of King book. It has more of a mystical feeling. It's less concerned with getting into the minds of its characters. It's more dreamlike, more like a weird tale. And it's kind of cold and told in a more distant voice. It does read like a Bachman book in some ways. So my reading of the Dark Tower series as a whole is that it's all about story. It's all about the importance of myth, the power of the rituals that surround stories, how stories are so important to humanity. We are drawn to story. We are drawn to fiction, to narrative. We are compelled to create stories. We are compelled to consume them. Humanity, I believe, needs fiction to survive. We need a narrative. We need to create, and we need to exercise our imagination. That's one thing I talk a lot about on the Dungeon Dive, is just how the games that we like to play are ways to exercise our imaginations. And the Dark Tower kind of represents the nexus of this power in our lives. And the entire series about how this power influences readers, how it influences writers and creators, and it influences the very things that we read. This theme is addressed quite early in The Gunslinger, when Roland first meets a character named Brown in an old ramshackle cabin in the desert. Roland feels drawn to tell Brown about the city of Toll, about the woman there that he might have loved, about the evil in the city, and about how he had to kill a bunch of people there. And yet he's unable to until a certain kind of ritual is performed. And that ritual is very simple. It just requires Brown to ask to be told the story. Roland can't tell his story until Brown asks. And so Brown obliges the Gunslinger, says, "All right, Gunslinger, tell me your story." They're sitting around a campfire. It's a very cliche kind of scenario, but it's one that invokes a lot of power, because Brown wants to be told the story, so he asks Roland, and then Roland is able to tell his story. There is a relationship between the storyteller and the listener, reader, or viewer, and this relationship is important to how we interact with fiction. This idea is also strengthened in how the book is structured. I've said it before, but it's worth repeating that King is a master of structure. The Gunslinger is structured as a series of nesting stories. Once the book starts, we kind of move back in time through a tunnel of nesting stories. We reach a certain point, and then we progress forward in a somewhat meandering way. Now, The Gunslinger is not an exciting novel, and I know some people do have issues with it. I've heard people suggest that new readers to this series start with book 2 and then read book 1 as a flashback. I don't really agree with this, but I understand it. It goes back to how I was saying how the book is so different. It's, if you're used to King and you haven't read The Dark Tower yet, and you go and you pick up The Gunslinger, it can be somewhat difficult to get into. And I understand that people struggle with it. I'm just not one of those people. For me, it hits all the right chords. It's a solid Western, a lot like High Plains Drifter. It's a great weird Western. It has elements of fantasy and horror. It has heroic deeds, sacrifice, love, and passion. It's a cowboy romance in all the right ways. And it does a very good job of setting the stage of what is about to come. And a lot of that stage setting happens in the last section. which I love. I love the final story in this book. The book doesn't end with an epic battle or an action set piece. It ends with a conversation about the size of the universe and about how Roland may be cursed to continue his quest. Perhaps Roland has been on this quest for a lot longer than he realizes it. It ends with Roland and the Man in Black having one of those stoner conversations that were always so fun to have in the kitchens during parties when we were younger. Again, it's not exciting, it's kind of meandering, but I find it immensely interesting. All right, so now let's go down and see where this is going to end up on the rankings. All right, guys, here we are at our ranking board. And here is the name placard for The Gunslinger, Dark Tower, Book 1. And our rankings so far, we have at the bottom, Needful Things, Firestarter, Tommyknockers, Cycle of the Werewolf, Skeleton Crew, Desperation, The Mist, and Pet Cemetery. It's no mystery. The Dark Tower, The Gunslinger, is moving straight to the top. It's, like I said earlier, it's going to be really unfair to almost every other Stephen King book, just how much I love The Dark Tower, how much it speaks to me, how rewarding I find that book. I find it immensely rewarding. It just speaks to me on so many different levels that it's impossible. It's almost impossible for me to gauge it fairly, just because of how much I absolutely love this series. So you're going to be seeing a lot of Dark Tower books way up at the top of this list. So going from number 1 down to the end, we'll just recap real quick. Dark Tower 1, The Gunslinger, Pet Cemetery, Mist, Desperation, Skeleton Crew, Cycle of the Werewolf, Tommyknockers, Firestarter, and Needful Things. So, all right, guys, well, take it easy, and we'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.